Power doesn't announce itself. It rearranges the room and lets everyone else figure out what changed. Something already shifted, and the proof is in how people started acting weird around you without an official memo. No explanation, no press release, no dramatic reveal. Just a sudden tension in the air. Conversations changed, energy shifted, reactions became sharper, quieter, or strangely defensive. That's not coincidence. That's impact registering late. Here's a fact most people never hear. Human beings subconsciously recalibrate how they treat you within seconds of sensing irreversible confidence. Neuroscience calls it dominance signaling, but not the loud, chest-beating kind. It's the kind that shows up when someone stops needing feedback to function. The brain reads that as authority before logic even catches up. That's why respect often arrives before understanding. What makes this unsettling and slightly funny is that you didn't do anything theatrical. You didn't clap back. You didn't explain your growth in a three-part thread. You didn't even look like you were trying. You just moved differently, calmer, sharper, less available. And somehow that quiet adjustment hit harder than a public victory lap ever could. People love comfort stories. They like predictable arcs where effort looks noisy and success asks permission. What disrupts them is when someone skips the performance and still alters the outcome. No struggle cosplay, no inspirational soundtrack, just clean execution and an energy that says, "I'm already past this." That's where the confusion starts, because when someone can't trace your power to a visible source, they assume something illegal, spiritual, or disrespectful happened. They replay moments, overanalyze conversations, and privately wonder what the hell you unlocked. Not because you threatened anyone, but because you broke a familiar rule without asking. This isn't about hype. It's about aftermath. Whatever the hell you just did wasn't loud, but it was final. And that's exactly why this conversation exists. Number 1. You didn't flinch when it mattered most. There was a moment where most people would have folded. Not because they're weak, but because pressure has a way of rewriting priorities. Comfort starts sounding reasonable. Compromise starts dressing itself up as maturity. Backing down starts calling itself peace. That's where most people blink. You didn't. You stayed steady when the cost became real. When being liked was suddenly on the table. When keeping your position, reputation, or access required you to bend just a little. You didn't dramatize it. You didn't make a speech. You simply didn't move. And that decision carried more weight than any loud reaction ever could. What people don't understand is that flinching is rarely obvious. It's subtle. It's the laugh you fake to soften a truth. It's the silence you offer to keep the room calm. It's the agreement you give just to avoid friction. You saw that moment coming and chose not to take the exit ramp. You let the discomfort sit. You let the tension breathe. You let the consequence land. That's when the shift happened. Because people can sense when someone doesn't negotiate with themselves anymore. It registers instantly. The tone changes. The respect recalibrates. Even the ones who don't like you start moving differently around you. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're anchored. You didn't flinch when expectations tried to corner you. You didn't rush to defend yourself when assumptions formed. You didn't dilute your stance to stay included. You accepted that standing firm might cost you something, and you decided that was fine. That's a level of internal agreement most people never reach. This is why your presence feels heavier now, not louder, heavier. Because you proved, without announcing it, that pressure doesn't own you. And once someone shows that, they don't need to intimidate, persuade, or perform. Their posture alone does the work. That single moment didn't just protect your integrity. It redefined how people file you in their minds. Not as someone to test, not as someone to push, but as someone who doesn't break when it's inconvenient to stay whole. Number 2, You acted without asking for permission. Most people are trained to wait, not because they lack ideas, but because they've been conditioned to look around first. They scan the room, they read the temperature, they listen for approval disguised as advice. Somewhere along the way, movement became something that needed consensus. You broke that pattern. You moved when the signal was internal, not external. You didn't crowdsource your instinct or soften your intent to make it easier to accept. You trusted your own timing, and that's unsettling to people who need reassurance before every step. When someone acts without asking, it exposes how many others were only pretending to be ready. What made it powerful wasn't speed. It was certainty. You weren't reckless or loud about it. You simply stopped waiting for validation to turn into courage. You understood that permission is rarely given in advance. It's granted after results show up. And instead of waiting for the invitation, you became the proof. People noticed, even if they couldn't explain it. Because action without approval creates a quiet authority. It shifts dynamics fast. Suddenly, opinions start arriving late. Advice shows up after the fact. The same people who hesitated begin explaining why they knew it would work. That's how you know the move landed. This kind of action also rewires how you see yourself. You stop treating others as gatekeepers to your own momentum. You realize that most rules are social agreements, not actual barriers. Once that clicks, hesitation loses its grip. You stop asking whether you're allowed and start deciding whether it's aligned. That's why this moment stuck with people. You didn't break rules for attention. You bypassed the need for permission entirely. That's different. It tells the world you're operating from internal authority, not borrowed confidence. And internal authority is hard to challenge because it doesn't depend on applause. You didn't wait for the room to agree before you moved. You moved, and the room had to adjust. That single decision repositions you permanently. Because once someone acts without asking, they're no longer seen as someone waiting to be chosen. They're seen as someone who chooses themselves, and that changes everything. Number 3, you absorbed chaos without becoming it. Chaos has a way of finding people who feel responsible for everything around them. It's loud, invasive, and exhausting. Most people react to it with equal parts panic and overcompensation. They yell, blame, or let fear dictate their next move. You didn't. You absorbed the chaos without letting it touch the core of who you are. That's rare, and that's why people notice, even if they can't put it into words. It's not about pretending the storm doesn't exist. It's about moving through it while keeping your center intact. You saw the confusion, the manipulation, the envy, the pressure, and instead of letting it shake you, you contained it. You let the noise exist externally while internally remaining precise, calm, and unshakable. That's why your presence feels different in a room full of tension, because you're a stabilizer, not an amplifier. Most people underestimate how much impact this has. Chaos is contagious, but steadiness is even more contagious, and far less expected. By absorbing what others could not, you forced their own reactions to reflect back on them. Suddenly their panic looks unnecessary. Their attempts to pull you into the fray fall flat. You don't participate in the drama, and that makes you unpredictable in the most powerful way. Absorbing chaos isn't passive. It's a deliberate choice to act without letting external turbulence dictate your behavior. You engage when it's needed, withdraw when it's not, and execute with clarity while everyone else is reacting. That's a level of control few achieve, because it requires trust in your own judgment above the noise. This is why people unconsciously respect you and, in some cases, fear you. Because when you move through disorder unshaken, it forces everyone else to confront their own inability to manage it. You didn't just survive chaos, you processed it, contained it, and came out intact, which rewrites the way the world registers you. That calm authority, achieved without showing off, is what makes you someone who can't be ignored. Number 4. You refuse to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Some people are impossible to reach. They've already made their judgment. Their minds aren't open. They're rehearsing arguments, looking for evidence to confirm what they've already decided. Most people panic in front of them, scrambling to justify, clarify, or apologize. You didn't. You recognized early that energy spent trying to convince the unconvinced is wasted energy, and you refuse to participate in their narrative. Refusing to explain yourself doesn't mean being rude or careless. It means understanding boundaries, knowing when words are serving communication and when they're just feeding obsession. You didn't waste time giving context to people whose only interest was proving you wrong or twisting your truth. You allowed your actions, results, and presence to speak, while letting their assumptions remain exactly that, assumptions. That restraint is magnetic. People are used to seeing arguments, defenses, and endless explanations. When someone chooses silence over justification, it flips the dynamic. Suddenly, the burden shifts. They look for cracks that aren't there. Their frustration grows because you're not playing the game they built to control the story. In refusing to explain, you don't just protect yourself, you subtly shift authority back to yourself. This also rewires your own perception of power. Once you stop validating every perception of you, you stop letting the world dictate your energy. You stop shrinking for understanding you'll never get. You stop treating ignorance as an obligation. That clarity translates into confidence, and confidence is always louder than words. Refusing to explain yourself becomes a shield and a statement at the same time. You show that truth doesn't need approval, integrity doesn't need applause, and accountability doesn't need a courtroom. You simply operate according to your own standard, while others spin themselves into confusion, trying to make sense of a standard they'll never match. That's why people notice, not because you screamed, defended, or dramatized, but because you moved untouchable within their judgment, letting them wrestle with their misunderstanding while you continued to rise. It's subtle, it's undeniable, and it's a power most people will never understand. Number 5, you didn't self-destruct for their comfort. Some people expect chaos to look like them. They assume that when pressure hits, you will crumble, panic, or spiral. They want you to perform in a way that makes them feel superior, safer, or right. Most people give in. They apologize unnecessarily, make excuses, or sabotage themselves just to calm someone else's anxiety. You didn't. You didn't trade your stability for their comfort. You stayed whole, and that alone shifted the balance of power. Refusing to self-destruct isn't about arrogance. It's about awareness. You recognize that giving someone else the satisfaction of watching you break wouldn't fix them or you. It would only feed their delusion of control. So instead of performing pain or submitting to their expectations, you maintained your center. You let the storm rage outside, but inside, you remained unshaken. That's a dangerous kind of respect, because it's invisible until it's undeniable. Most people underestimate how deeply this affects others. When someone expects you to bend and you don't, it rewires how they calculate their influence over you. Suddenly, threats, manipulation, and social pressure no longer work the way they used to. They realize, often too late, that you operate on a standard of your own making, one that doesn't depend on their comfort or approval. By refusing to collapse, you also protect your future. Self-destruction might feel like surrender, but it's actually a transfer of power. When you keep yourself intact, you preserve your focus, energy, and clarity. You're able to make decisions without the fog of resentment, guilt, or exhaustion clouding your judgment. That's how long-term results are built, quietly, steadily, without giving the world the spectacle it craves. This is why people start noticing. They see that no matter how much they push, prod, or provoke, you remain unbroken. Your composure becomes a mirror they can't look away from. You didn't crumble for them, and in doing so, you didn't just survive. You rewrote the rules for how anyone thought they could influence you. Staying whole wasn't passive, it was a quiet declaration. Your expectations do not define my limits. Number 6. You chose precision over noise. Most people mistake being loud for being effective. They raise their voice, flood the room with activity, or make dramatic gestures to prove they exist and matter. You didn't. You understood something that others miss. Impact isn't measured by volume, it's measured by exactness. You moved with precision, not desperation. Every step, every word, every action was calculated to produce the exact effect you intended and nothing more. That's why your presence carries weight that no one can ignore, even if you never shout about it. Choosing precision over noise is a form of quiet power. It's noticing where the weak points are, understanding timing, and executing moves that disrupt without drawing unnecessary attention. While others are flailing, reacting, or performing for approval, you operate under a different rhythm. Your results don't depend on anyone applauding. They arrive anyway, undeniable and irreversible. That contrast makes people uneasy because they're used to chaos and spectacle. They expect noise. You didn't give it. What makes this even more effective is that precision creates anticipation. People start paying attention, not because you demand it, but because your moves land exactly where they're supposed to. Every word, every gesture, every decision is like a carefully placed domino. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to justify it. They just notice the effects, and those effects are always bigger than they anticipate. Precision also protects energy. Noise burns attention, stamina, and credibility. By being exact instead of excessive, you conserve influence and focus on what actually matters. That means long-term dominance isn't about being seen everywhere. It's about being unforgettable in the moments that count. This is why your presence feels different. You're not flashy. You're not performing. You're surgical. And people can sense it even if they can't define it. While others exhaust themselves shouting, spinning, or proving, you operate quietly, deliberately, and with results that scream louder than any act ever could. Choosing precision over noise doesn't just make you efficient, it makes you untouchable in ways most people will never understand. Number 7. You outgrew environments without announcing it. Most people think growth needs a spotlight. They believe transformation requires announcements, explanations, or dramatics to be recognized. You didn't. You didn't make a speech, post a highlight reel, or explain why you were moving differently. You simply stopped fitting where small thinking thrived. You outgrew the environment quietly, naturally, almost invisibly, but the effect was seismic. People noticed the absence of the old version of you before they understood the new one. Outgrowing a space without announcing it is a power move. It signals evolution without performance. While everyone else is busy narrating progress, you simply move past the limitations that held others hostage. Relationships, workplaces, friendships, social circles, they all have invisible boundaries. Most people push against those boundaries with effort or argument, trying to stay relevant or accepted. You didn't. You bypassed them by raising your standard internally, and the environment adjusted whether it wanted to or not. This kind of growth is unsettling to others because it exposes their own stagnation. They see the same people, same habits, same conversations, but you've already leapt forward. The same rules that once applied no longer do. The same influence you once accepted or tolerated is no longer binding. You didn't need to tell anyone you were different. Your choices, your energy, and your outcomes announced it for you. Outgrowing quietly also preserves dignity. You avoid conflicts, explanations, or unnecessary friction. You leave behind only evidence of your evolution, forcing people to reconcile with the fact that you moved past them without resentment or fanfare. That makes your progress look effortless, almost untouchable. By the time anyone realizes you've left their version of the world behind, you're already operating on a plane they didn't know existed. You didn't ask for recognition. You didn't seek applause. You simply outgrew environments that no longer served your expansion, and that's why your presence now feels entirely different, because growth that can't be contained always shifts the rules for everyone else. Number 8. You let results speak without worshipping them. Most people tie their identity to outcomes. They measure self-worth by applause, recognition, or visible success. They chase validation like it's the air they breathe, and the moment something doesn't land, they panic, over-explain, or overreact. You didn't. You let results exist without turning them into proof of your value. You understood that results are consequences, not trophies, and that treating them as anything more gives other people a way to manipulate or define you. Letting results speak without worshipping them is quiet mastery. It's knowing that influence and power aren't in the certificate, the follower count, or the nod of approval. They're in the change that happens because of your work, whether anyone notices or not. You focus on the execution, the strategy, the alignment, and then let the ripples carry themselves. That's why your victories feel effortless and unsettling to people who obsess over every detail. They're waiting for you to brag, over-explain, or perform gratitude, and you don't. You just keep moving. This approach also shifts perception. People see your results, but because you don't weaponize them for attention, they have to interpret their impact on their own. There's no ego to fight, no theatrics to counter. The outcomes exist as undeniable proof of your ability, not your neediness. That makes you more credible, more respected, and far more intimidating than someone who constantly broadcasts success. It also protects your energy. Worshipping results turns them into anchors that can weigh you down. When you let results live in their own space, you avoid being trapped by expectation, envy, or the constant need to defend your achievements. You create freedom to keep evolving, to keep taking bigger steps without being held hostage by your past wins. By letting results speak without worshipping them, you quietly redefine influence. You teach the world that impact is enough, that presence matters more than applause, and that those who measure power by attention will always be one step behind. You don't need to announce your victories, they announce you. And that's a kind of authority no one can negotiate with. Number 9, you broke patterns instead of people. Most people think influence comes from confrontation, from breaking someone down, or proving dominance by force. That's the obvious approach, and it's temporary. You didn't operate that way. You understood that real power doesn't come from crushing others. It comes from dismantling cycles, systems and patterns that keep failure, chaos, or toxicity alive. You changed the game quietly, without making enemies or performing spectacle, and that's why your impact lingers long after the moment passes. Breaking patterns instead of people requires awareness. You saw how habits, expectations, and repetitive behaviors trap not just yourself, but everyone around you, and instead of focusing on individuals, you targeted the structures that created the problem. That's why people can't respond to you the usual way. They can't intimidate you, manipulate you, or replay old scripts, because the pattern you moved through no longer exists. And because patterns are invisible to most, the shift feels subtle, almost unnoticeable, until the effect is undeniable. This approach also makes your moves permanent. People recover from confrontation. They recover from chaos, drama, or verbal attacks. But once a destructive pattern is disrupted at its source, the system itself has to rebuild. That gives you a kind of authority that no argument, no outburst, and no intimidation can ever challenge. You don't just survive the storm, you change the weather. Breaking patterns instead of people also rewires how others perceive you. They start realizing that control isn't about intimidation, and influence isn't about fear. You showed that the real leverage is in precision, strategy, and awareness. While others get caught up in emotional reactions, you were already moving to the next level. You didn't focus on winning arguments, humiliating opponents, or punishing mistakes. You focused on ending repetition, stopping cycles, and making disruption inevitable. And that's why your presence now carries weight. It's quiet, it's calculated, and it's permanent. You don't just participate in life, you restructure it. And that's a kind of mastery almost no one ever achieves. Number 10. You stayed consistent when no one was watching. Most people show up when there's an audience. Praise, attention, or recognition drives their consistency. When the lights are on, they perform. When no one is looking, their focus disappears. You didn't operate that way. You maintained your standards, your discipline, and your energy regardless of who was paying attention. That quiet consistency is one of the most underrated forms of power, and it's what separates those who merely survive from those who dominate. Consistency, when invisible, is a test of character. It's easy to act motivated when external pressure exists, when applause or validation is within reach. The real challenge is keeping the same level of commitment when no one is documenting it, when no one is counting, and when shortcuts are available. You showed up anyway, day after day, action after action, regardless of acknowledgement. That persistence creates results that accumulate silently, like a force that no one notices until it's unstoppable. What makes this dangerous to others is that consistency compounds quietly but explosively. While everyone else is distracted by appearances, hype, or recognition, you're quietly building the foundation that outpaces them. They can't track it, they can't anticipate it. By the time your results are visible, it feels like magic, but it's actually method. It's relentless repetition, focus, and commitment performed without needing applause. Staying consistent also rewires your own mindset. You stop looking outward for validation. You stop seeking approval because your actions have intrinsic weight. You develop a kind of internal authority that no criticism, jealousy, or manipulation can shake. The habit of showing up for yourself, even when invisible, builds confidence that doesn't waver in the face of noise or opposition. This is why people eventually notice. Not because you screamed, performed, or demanded attention, but because results don't lie. Your quiet consistency becomes undeniable. It rewrites expectations and forces the world to acknowledge a reality they never saw forming. You didn't perform for anyone, you performed for yourself, and that is a power almost no one else can replicate. Number 11. You stopped trying to be understood and focused on being accurate. Most people live in a constant trap of needing to be understood. They over-explain, justify, and bend themselves to fit someone else's perception. They confuse clarity with truth, assuming that if everyone agrees, their position is solid. You didn't play that game. You stopped trying to force comprehension and focused instead on being accurate, precise, and correct in your actions, decisions, and words. That shift alone changes everything about how people perceive and respond to you. Accuracy over understanding is a subtle but deadly kind of power. It's not flashy. It doesn't rely on applause, validation, or agreement. It operates under a simple principle. Truth doesn't require approval. By committing to correctness rather than relatability, you removed the need to negotiate reality for others. You let facts, outcomes, and integrity speak for themselves, while everyone else burned energy trying to persuade, explain, or manipulate perception. This approach also exposes who is genuine and who is performative. People who can't tolerate truth without interpretation start revealing themselves. They try to twist your accuracy into misunderstanding, but because your focus isn't on convincing, their efforts collapse on their own. You're no longer debating perception, you're living in reality. And reality always has the upper hand over opinion. Focusing on accuracy also rewires your own mindset. You stop shrinking, apologizing, or softening decisions to make someone else comfortable. You stop treating other people's mental frameworks as authority over your choices. That creates a clarity of action that's rare, almost impossible to interrupt once established. By prioritizing accuracy over being understood, you also force people to confront themselves. They either adjust to reality or stay trapped in their own confusion. You don't need to fight. You don't need to argue. You simply operate on a standard of truth, and the world is forced to respond. That's why your influence grows quietly but unmistakably. Accuracy doesn't just change outcomes, it rewires the environment around you, making you someone who can't be twisted, questioned, or undermined. Number 12. You didn't weaponize your pain for sympathy. Most people make the mistake of turning their struggles into performance. They highlight every wound, exaggerate every setback, and hand out their suffering like it's currency, hoping for recognition, comfort, or approval. You didn't. You carried your pain silently, transformed it into clarity, and used it to sharpen your vision instead of manipulate attention. That's why your energy feels different, because it's forged from experience, not drama. Choosing not to weaponize your pain doesn't mean you ignored it. It means you refused to make it someone else's problem. You processed it, internalized the lessons, and converted the emotional weight into fuel for decisions, strategy, and focus. While others were busy narrating their suffering, you were quietly building resilience. You turned trauma into structure, setbacks into understanding, and conflict into foresight. That's why results from your effort feel inevitable, because they're rooted in real mastery rather than performance. This approach changes how people relate to you. Those accustomed to emotional currency find themselves powerless. They can't provoke pity, guilt, or overcompensation from you because your strength isn't performative. It's invisible, but undeniable. You don't need to explain what you went through, and that makes you untouchable in a way most people never experience. Your pain is your private asset, not their entertainment. Not weaponizing your pain also rewires your own energy. You stop measuring your worth by how others respond to your suffering. You stop depending on empathy to validate your journey. That freedom makes decision-making sharper, reactions quicker, and resilience permanent. You are no longer reactive, you are proactive. By letting pain refine you instead of selling it, you create a presence that's quiet but magnetic. People feel it without understanding it, and that's a rare kind of authority. You didn't need sympathy, applause, or validation. You only needed mastery, and mastery doesn't ask permission. It doesn't negotiate. It quietly changes the rules for everyone else, leaving you standing while the world scrambles to catch up. Number 13. You allowed people to underestimate you without correcting them. Most people panic when someone misjudges them. They feel the need to explain, clarify, or prove themselves instantly. They react to perception as if it were reality. You didn't. You understood the quiet power in letting others underestimate you. You let them assume, speculate, and miscalculate while you moved in a completely different lane. That patience and restraint create an edge few people ever realize until it's too late. Allowing people to underestimate you isn't passive, it's strategic. While they expend energy sizing you up, trying to find weaknesses or rehearsing arguments, you conserve your energy, sharpen your focus, and prepare moves that they can't anticipate. Their underestimation becomes your camouflage. They think they know the terrain, but the map you're following exists somewhere they've never been invited to read. That gives you freedom to operate, execute, and dominate without interference or unnecessary attention. The power of this is psychological. People rarely stop to analyze why their assumptions fail. They just react to the results. And by then, it's too late. You've already set the pace, and the underestimated force they ignored now reshapes their expectations entirely. That shock factor is what separates you from anyone chasing recognition or constantly proving themselves. You don't need to defend your position. The effect of your actions does it for you. This approach also rewires your own perception of influence. When you stop worrying about how others see you, you stop giving them control over your energy. You make decisions according to your vision, not their opinion. That clarity of intent is rare, and it compounds over time. By letting others misjudge you, you turn underestimation into a weapon. People's assumptions become irrelevant, and you move untouchable, unnoticed and unbothered. You don't announce your strength. You don't brag about capability. You act quietly, deliberately, and effectively. And when the truth finally hits them, it hits harder because they thought they had a read on you. That's the power of restraint, patience, and letting results do the talking while everyone else is still guessing. Number 14. You finished what others only talked about surviving. Most people spend their lives narrating survival like it's a badge of honor. They talk about the storm, the struggle, the drama, but when it comes to crossing the finish line, very few actually get there. You didn't just survive, you completed the journey. You didn't linger in the chaos or decorate the pain with excuses. You saw the challenges, faced them fully, and carried yourself to the other side, intact and stronger. That distinction is subtle but seismic, and it's what separates someone who simply exists from someone who leaves a mark. Finishing what others only talk about requires grit, focus, and an almost stubborn refusal to settle for half measures. While others are busy rehearsing their struggle for attention or validation, you were moving quietly, step by step, refusing shortcuts, refusing compromise, refusing to let fear dictate your next move. You transformed obstacles into milestones, turning moments that would have broken others into tools for growth and strategy. That's why your progress feels unstoppable. It's not performative, it's built on completion. People underestimate what finishing looks like because most are conditioned to equate survival with noise and drama. They expect chaos, excuses, and emotional displays, but your completion is silent, clean, and absolute. It carries weight precisely because it's unannounced. By the time anyone realizes the journey is over, the results are undeniable. You didn't need applause, you didn't need explanation. You simply arrived where most couldn't even commit to walking. Finishing also rewires perception. Not just theirs, but yours. You no longer see challenges as endless cycles of struggle, but as gates with clear exits. You stop replaying failure in your mind because you understand what it means to see the process through. That certainty creates a kind of authority no one else can replicate because it isn't performance, it's fact. You didn't just survive. You completed. You transformed struggle into results, chaos into structure, and pain into mastery. That's why your presence now feels different, undeniable, and quietly intimidating. You aren't just part of the story. You're the part everyone else wished they had the courage to finish. Everything we've gone through here paints one clear truth. Whatever the hell you just did, it wasn't small, accidental, or unnoticed. From refusing to flinch under pressure to moving without asking for permission, from absorbing chaos without becoming it to breaking patterns instead of people, every single action you've taken tells a story of someone operating on a completely different level. You didn't seek validation, You didn't perform for approval, and you didn't sacrifice your integrity for comfort. You moved deliberately, quietly, and with a precision that most people will never understand. And yet the results are undeniable. You've outgrown environments silently, allowed others to underestimate you, transformed pain into power, stayed consistent when no one was watching, and finished what others only talked about: surviving. Each choice you made, each boundary you held, and each principle you refused to compromise on has accumulated into something that speaks louder than any words ever could. It's the energy you carry, the confidence that refuses to be shaken, and the results that arrive whether anyone applauds or not. That's why you're the Motherf Cker. That's why people feel the shift around you, even if they can't define it. That's why your presence now carries weight, authority, and undeniable influence. This isn't just about survival, clever moves, or personal victories. It's about mastery. Mastery over yourself, your environment, and the energy you allow in your space. It's about being the kind of person whose life isn't dictated by noise, drama, or other people's assumptions. It's about moving through the world untouchable, focused, and unstoppable, while everyone else scrambles to understand what just happened. If this hit you hard, if you feel that shift inside, then don't let this energy stop here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video that strengthens your power, focus, and awareness. Hit that like button to show you're claiming your authority. Drop a comment sharing your breakthrough or what resonates most, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand what it truly means to rise beyond expectations. Your journey is just beginning, and the world is already taking notice. God bless you.